Good morning.
We have via teleconference from Burnaby, British Columbia, the other end of the country, Mr. Roger Bahati.
It's not working.
It's not working. So hopefully by the time we proceed with the first two presenters, the video conference from Burnaby will be working. So each of you have up to 8 minutes to make a presentation, sir, and then members of the committee will have questions of you. Mr. Collacott, you may go first. You have up to 8 minutes. Thanks for coming, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. As I haven't had a chance to speak to most of the members of the committee before, I think only you and Mr. Dykstra have been on previous meetings I've been at. I'd like to just give a quick background on what my interest is in immigration, my connection with it. I was involved some years ago in programs for immigrants when I was the citizenship advisor for the Ontario government, and I was responsible for services to English and citizenship classes and teachers throughout the province. After that, I was sent by the Canadian International Development Agency to the Malaysian state of Sabah, where I spent 5 years training English teachers in Chinese schools, and that gave me some exposure to the immigrant experience in other countries. Later, when I worked for Foreign Affairs, I served as Canadian High Commissioner and Ambassador in a number of countries where there were high flows of immigrants and refugees to Canada. For the last 10 years, I've been a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute, and then last year we formed a new group, Center for Immigration Policy Reform, to try and raise public awareness of immigration and refugee issues and encourage informed public debate on these topics. And I'm the spokesperson and chair of the advisory board. Finally, on a personal level, I mentioned my parents are both immigrants. They're from Britain. My wife's an immigrant from Asia, and some of my in-laws were boat people from Vietnam, which gives me an interest in refugee policy and issues. I'll make some comments about the backlog in general, as well as the backlog of sponsored parents and grandparents in particular, since the latter is perhaps most sensitive from a political perspective. With respect to the overall backlog, the problem has been developing for some years because until recently, Canada established annual targets levels, but not annual caps, which meant that the number of people applying to come here and who could meet the requirements were often much greater than what we needed or could absorb. In contrast, the U.S. puts an annual limit on how many people they'll admit, and then applicants are under no illusion. They may have to wait quite a long time to come in if they don't make the cut for the current year. And as Minister Kenny's pointed out, there's no shortage of people who want to immigrate to Canada. In 2008, the government wisely took action that gave it authority to give priority to the applications of those most likely to succeed in Canada and benefit Canadians. I would question the solution proposed by some that we raise our immigration levels in order to admit all those currently in the queue. There's abundant evidence we're already bringing in far more people than we need. I'm not going to have time to go through all the reasons why levels are much higher than they should be. I'll just mention a few. To begin with, the prosperity of a country doesn't depend on a constantly growing population or workforce. Our prosperity depends rather on having sound economic policies that stimulate increases in productivity and make the best use of our existing workforce, including women, Aboriginals, immigrants already here, and older people. Some claim that high levels of immigration are necessary if we're to meet our anticipated labor shortages. The fact is we already have potential labor forces and educational infrastructure that are required to meet all such shortages. One figure that has been given by Professor Marcel Meret of Ottawa University is that he's a demographer, is that you raise the average current retirement of Canadians by 1 year from 61.2 to 62.2 years. That's the equivalent of bringing in an extra 65,000 high-qualified immigrants. And if you raise it to 65, you have a tremendous impact. And there's evidence people are already starting to retire later. That began long before the recession, but it's accelerating. The Economic Council of Canada landmark study of the social and economic impacts of immigration that was done 10 years ago, concluded that immigration was not justified in today's Canada on either economic or demographic grounds. The study pointed out that almost all labor shortages could be met domestically if wages were allowed to rise and more Canadians were attracted by the higher pay and acquired the training necessary to fill the gaps. The head of the economics department at the University of British Columbia, Professor David Green, made the same points earlier this year when he told the annual Metropolis Conference that natural market responses to labor shortages such as pay hikes can be obstructed when immigration increases the supply of workers and thus reduces wages. And if you're looking at immigration as a major driver of economic growth, you're looking in the wrong place. And David Green, by the way, is also a research associate with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Just last week, a committee of the Labour government in Australia issued a report saying there was little evidence to support claims immigration was an important driver of per capita economic growth or that it could alleviate the problems of an ageing population. Similar conclusions were reached in a House of Lords report in the United Kingdom 2008 and in a bipartisan committee of the U.S. Congress in 1997. I mention these points to underline that while immigration has played a major role in Canada's development at various times in its history, and Canadians are justified in viewing it positively, there is nevertheless strong evidence that current immigration levels are far higher than we really need and are very costly for Canadians. And the cost was touched on by previous witnesses who pointed out that it could be as much as $16 to $23 billion a year. And not only should the intake of skilled workers be significantly reduced, more emphasis put on the training and employment of Canadians, but other programs should either be reduced or eliminated completely. The live-in care program as a path to permanent residence, for example, is particularly ill-conceived and should be eliminated with minimum delay. Neither the investor nor entrepreneurial programs have much to justify them. The government has already begun some moves on that. There should be concern over the rapid expansion of provincial nominee programs. It's important that the provinces be consulted on immigration issues that affect them, but far too much authority has been delegated to them. As for what to do with the backlog, the action the government has taken to date to deal with it makes a good deal of sense. Give priority to those most likely to be a success and contribute to the economy. Although I'd qualify this by referring to my earlier statement to the effect that we're still taking in far too many immigrants, whether well-qualified federal skilled workers or not. What I'd suggest is that given the unexpected length of time many in the queue will have to wait to get their visas, they at least be given the opportunity to cancel their applications and receive a full refund for the fees they've paid. There is a legal obligation to process the applications that have been made to date, but we never guaranteed a particular time frame for letting people in, and I think the government's quite right in concentrating on those who we need the most. I'll conclude my remarks with a few comments on sponsorship of parents and grandparents. I think it's quite understandable newcomers would like to bring their parents and grandparents with them, but bringing them into Canada is very costly for Canadian taxpayers, particularly with regard to health care. Based on data summarizing the average healthcare costs of different age groups, a study released by the C.D. Howe Institute earlier this year, the healthcare costs of sponsored parents and grandparents who have come here since 1990 could amount to as much as $84.4 billion. And if you include all those who've come since 1980, the cost rise to over $103 billion.
Perhaps you could wind up soon, Mr. Collacott. You've got about 30 seconds.
Okay. These costs don't include old age security guaranteed income supplement. One final comment on parents is when Australia introduced tougher measures for bringing in parents, it was predicted that good immigrants won't apply because they can't bring their parents with them. That simply wasn't true. They got just as many applications. If you can bring your parents and grandparents with you, that's a bonus. If you can't, that's hardly going to be the deciding factor on whether you immigrate to another country. So that is a bogus argument. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very